Come on by and have a bite at the CrossRoad Diner, where your spirit goes when it might be time to change direction. Welcome back to the CrossRoad Diner. I'm Steve McCurdy. I'm your host, and I'm really jazzed today. I've got a very good friend on that I've known for several years. In fact, he was one of the major audio books that I have in my resume. He called me and was looking for somebody to speak for him, and that was a real challenge. But let me welcome my good friend and author, Andy Chaleff. Welcome to the diner.
Happy to be here. I even got my coffee. It's
Okay.
5:30 a.m. and I've got my coffee.
That's
and I even write. I should do it this way so that it looks oh, you can't see it. I think.
No, I got it. My family tree is full of nuts. Good deal. That's terrific. Andy, on the CrossRoad Diner, we talk about those places where you're rocking along in your life and you decide you got to be more intentional about this. You got to think about it. Yeah. You got to do something. And this isn't it. You don't necessarily know what it is, but you know this isn't it.
Yeah.
Or the flip side is you've always known that you needed to do this, that, or the other thing, but you've done something else for some reason. And, or you think it, and then you get to that place and you're doing that and it's not it, but it points to it. So because I had the opportunity to work on your first book with you, I know you've lived in the CrossRoad Diner. You are a constant examiner of, where am I? Where do I want to be? And it's sort of become a profession for you in a way, is helping people do that. Talk to me a little bit about
that's very much so. Well, I mean, actually, even yesterday, I had a client call me and they said, Andy, I'm in a job I'm not particularly happy with. And I got this other opportunity that was put, and I got so excited. But then I thought about all the reasons why I shouldn't be doing it, and I just didn't do it. And I had this sort of deep chuckle inside, like, oh, so you're still living in the world of I've got to keep up appearances, or I need to have my resume look nice, or maybe the world will judge me if I've only been at this job for a year, right? So that there was this kind of
there's some
humorous
floating
moment.
There's some floating should that overrides I want.
Yes, and I think it. And I was with this client who's also a friend. I had to sort of share that, like, in his journey, he needs to go through a few of those sometimes in order to realize, oh, there's a consequence to not following my heart. And if you don't see the consequence to it, then you don't have any reason to do it. You can stay in that kind of stagnant space for a really long time.
It's stagnant, but sometimes it's very comfortable.
It's the golden handcuffs. Yeah.
It's physically comfortable, not emotionally comfortable. And if you grew up thinking you don't have a right to have what you want or be happy, then that works.
It works. It can work a lot. I mean, if you think about people in society, I would say there's a large percentage who don't even have the concept they can live a life that they'd really like and enjoy. They kind of feel a sense of duty and obligation. Yeah.
Yeah. And this show and kind of my mission in life, is certainly at this point in it, is to be an encourager and a light holder on of that truth, and giving people a chance to go, do I want to try something?
Yeah.
The other thing that I discovered as a result of that, because I knew when I was little bitty that I wanted to do this. I wanted to be on radio. I wanted to be on television. I wanted to, entertain and tell great stories, just tell great stories. And this show is just one story after another. No matter who you bring on, they've got 40. And, so stories are all around us, but I had a family that said, oh, no, you got to make money. You got to do this. You got to keep that wolf backed off. And, if you go the way that you want to go, the wolf will eat you before you know you've been bitten.
Yeah.
And I believed them. I believed that that naive, childish want to that I had, was ignorance, and that I was and the worst thing in the world that could happen is if I failed and they said, I told you so.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, that was my dad, right? In my own life, my dad was the one. I remember graduating from college, and he said, "This piece of paper and $1 will get you a cup of coffee." It was the encouragement and the nurturing didn't exist,
That's right. That's
right?
right. And then
Yeah.
as a result of that, talk to us a little bit about how that impacted you and what you did as a result of that.
You know, I always sort of in my own life look at these developmental stages, right? It's not like a science. I'm sure there's science that backs it up, but in my mind, there's like always a moment when I define myself by societal norms.
Yeah.
And there was a moment when that was no longer what I defined, my success or how I wanted to be seen as.
Right.
So it was like a moment when I said, wow, I can be whatever I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And there are going to be people that don't like that. And I have to be okay with that. And that wasn't easy because I was really one of these people that wanted to be liked.
Right.
So part of my journey was being okay with not being liked. And that I remember when we talk about the crossroads, like the biggest crossroads that I decided upon. I mean, there were many crossroads when my mom, was killed by the drunk driver at 18. That was a big crossroads, but I didn't
Right.
decide that one. That was it, say, imposed on me. But
Sure.
when I was in my mid 30s and I was in this job, and I tell you, Steve, I was, in my 30s, marketing director, my car paid for, my telephone, all my vacations, getting paid way too much money, and just like it was like, wow, this is the life. And I was so empty and unhappy. So it was 3 years of looking at myself in the mirror and saying, I don't like what I see. Like I remember being really like, I would always ask the question, if I died and this was my life, would that be okay? Like, and I'd say no. Like, so on one side, I got all the creature comforts, and on the other side, I'm not happy.
Right.
And that went on for maybe 3 years of just not really knowing what I wanted to do and not being confident enough to leave what I was doing. The first thing I think people do is they look for something like, oh, I'll be happier at another job.
Right.
So it's an incremental change. It's like, oh, I'm not happy in this just because of the company.
Hmm.
And I think I did a little bit of that,
Well,
but
yeah,
not so much.
you have a desire to be better, but not have to learn a whole bunch of new stuff. I want to do, I want to do something that I know that I'm good at, that I don't have to think about very much,
Yeah.
and have different results than I'm getting now.
Yeah.
Because you haven't, and yeah, I think the reflection thing that you're talking about is critical. I think that giving yourself permission to believe in a world where it's okay to be joyful and to be fulfilled and satisfied, that is not once I retire and I've got all the money made, then I'll do these things that I want to do and want to be.
Yeah.
Of course, I won't have
narrative.
any health left and I won't be able to have any energy to go do it.
Yeah.
So how did you went through a process,
Yeah.
and then you made a change. What provoked the change?
What provoked the change was so I've been in that company, and I was lucky enough because what's that saying? When the student's ready, the teacher will arrive.
Yeah, appear.
And so I found a really wonderful human being whose name was Case de Brown. And Case was someone I hired to work for my company, and I brought him in. He made me so uncomfortable. I mean, so uncomfortable. I would be in meetings and I would see he was addressing the fundamental issues, the underlying current of emotion that was always not spoken about. So
Right.
it's always the thing that stopped everything from happening, but we can't talk about it. And so he was like going right to that point, and I was sitting there like, oh my, this is uncomfortable, and
we've got the elephant in the room, and he's talking about the damn elephant.
But we don't talk about the elephant. No. The elephant exists. We're going to do a lot of change, but not that elephant. And he had a profound impact on my life. So what happened was I looked at him, and I think he was the first person who called me out on my BS. And he just said, Andy, whatever you're doing, you're fooling yourself. And I could see that he was saying it with love. There wasn't like any ill intent. And it literally, I think, say 3 to 6 months after having met him, I sold everything I owned, and I picked up from where I was living at that time in Vienna, Austria, and I moved to Amsterdam. And I remember it felt like, when you narrate your life and there's like a movie scene in it. I'm now at the top of my game. And then I've sold everything, and then I move into this attic space. It's like no heating, no water, no electricity, no toilet, right? There was
Oh
nothing in
my.
there except space. And I was so happy, Steve. Like, I can't tell you, like, I try to explain to people,
You're
like,
scaring my
when
audience to death. You are terrifying. That radical of a change was necessary for you, I guess, but I don't think that's always the case. Uh,
no, it's not for everyone, but for me,
tell
it
me
was
how that
something.
tell me how that made you so
But
happy. What connect those dots for me a minute. You were without creature comforts thoroughly, but
yeah,
something was so satisfying that it made that cool and okay.
yeah, I was alive. I knew what it felt like to be alive again. Before then, I was doing someone else's work. I was making, of course, very good money, but I wasn't living on the edge of discovering myself. So it was all about creation of someone else's life in the business with something that, it was technology. I knew it's going to evolve in 5 years. Wherever I was, it was going to be on the blip on the level of what might made life meaningful.
Footnote.
And yeah, and so I just said no. I'm going to live a meaningful life, whatever that looks like. And still to today, I don't know what that looks like. I
Right.
honestly can't say I'm doing what I want to be doing. I can always say there's nothing more I'd rather be doing. There's nothing else I'd rather be doing.
So what you're putting a highlight on right there is incredibly important to me. Is that we live in a paradigm where we think there is a thing that will be it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what you have come to peace with is there's going to be a string of things, and I'm going to move through all of them because life is evolving at light speed. The technology that I'm a master of right now won't even exist, in 7 to 10 years. The kids that are in school learning this right now, when they come to work for me, are going to have to learn something new. They will have learned the principles and they've learned how to learn.
Yeah.
We accept that for moving technology, but we don't accept it for us as human beings in a world that's evolving so quickly.
Yeah.
But when you do, and maybe that's the key. Maybe the fact that you have come to accept the fact that there is no it, that there's a series, you are evolving and you're growing and you don't even know now what's going to thrill you later because you haven't evolved to the place to appreciate it. Right?
Exactly. I mean, I would have never imagined that I would. So I went from the first two books. I've now, of course, the third book, the Connection Playbook, will come out in September. And then I might go radio silent in my head for a year, but then all of a sudden there's just a bang. It's, oh, I've got to write a book on death. So now,
Mm.
to my wife's dismay, I'm, halfway through that book. And the joy is that, as you said, I don't know who I'm going to be 3 to 6 months down the road, right? What I know is what engages me at this moment. And that's a scary thing for people
Oh
because,
yeah.
you could, and I also see some traps in it. I don't want to like over profess it without saying the shiny objects, right? Like oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in this now. Oh, I'm interested in that now. And so I've got my base clear and sense of people come to me. I'm a mentor and a coach. So I make more than enough money in that domain. So I enjoy it. So let's get that clear. And
Right.
then I get the opportunity to do the things I love, which are writing around topics, which is, as everyone knows who writes, you write to get clarity for yourself.
That's
You're
exactly
not
right.
writing. Yeah, you're not writing to try to explain something to someone. You're like, how clear have I got this in myself? And you learn that through the writing process. Yeah,
Exactly. And let's say, and that's the same thing with playwrights and movie writers and any storyteller. They're not trying to convey wisdom that they've arrived at. They're trying to get to the wisdom, and that's their path is
yeah,
moving through it. I had a logic professor in college that said, if you can't explain an idea to me in 2 minutes, you don't understand
yeah,
it yet.
yeah.
And I thought, great. So can I give you a 2-page paper for my, for my assignment? And he's going, no, I want to watch the process of you fumbling through it. So,
Oh, buddy.
yeah. But I think that's the other reason that people, really, really resonate with works like yours is because they recognize themselves on the same journey and
Yeah,
they get to pages that they haven't gotten to yet, but They recognize it, or it's familiar to them as, yeah, I feel like that's right over the hill for me, or now I'm there.
And that's what I love, what you just said, because that's the way I want to interact with the world. You know, the famous
Mhm.
Gandhi quote, be the example you want to see in the world, right?
Right.
And in my mind, when I write, I'm wanting to write from the vulnerability of the experience, not from the intellectual
That's great.
wisdom that came from it. Because
Right.
there's a separation there that's like, oh, I achieve this now,
Yes.
and now I can talk about it in retrospect as if I'm beyond it, where you know, it's leaving yourself vulnerable is exactly that tool that helps other people be vulnerable with themselves. Yeah.
I'm working on some material right now with Brene Brown, is from the University of Houston, and she
Yeah.
talks about shame and vulnerability, and
Yeah.
all of the companies that she talks to go, we want you to come and talk, but we don't want the same thing. Stay away from that.
Yeah, exactly.
Stay away from the vulnerability thing. We're scared of vulnerability. And she's going, yeah. And the greater your fear is, the more of that you'll have. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
that's the
Yeah. In fact, I
dance.
wrote on that this morning on the sense of death, because I one of the chapters is on our relationship with death as we age. And I
Right.
remembered my youngest feelings on death were that it wasn't something we really talked about. And
Hmm.
because it wasn't talked about, there was more anxiety about it, because it was like, hold
Right.
on,
The
you know,
mystery.
now there's something that, yeah, there's something we're not supposed to talk about. You know, it's the same with sexuality and pornography, right?
Right.
If it's like you don't do that, you should look at it. All of a sudden you get this, well, what's going on there? I have to figure this out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Adam and Eve proved that point. That's the first point that got proved. Anything
Yeah,
that
it
you
wasn't it.
deny me is the thing that now I've got total interest in,
Yeah.
curiosity about. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you are doing the work that you're doing, which is thematically, I think the same work we're doing here, it's trying to help people accept themselves, accept their own frustrations, accept it
Mm,
where it is that they are, and then start to recognize that. Because until you accept yourself, until you are at peace with that, and at peace with the fact that you're not a master of everything,
yeah.
that in order to even get to be kind of good at a thing, you got to suck at it for a while, because
Totally.
that's how you figure out where the path is,
Yeah.
and we have this paradigm. You go to college, you learn all the stuff, and now you know things. And that's not why you
Yeah.
go to college at
No.
all.
You go to
Uh,
college to find women to potentially marry. That's why you go to college.
and women go to college to find men who are successful and can keep them in the life that they don't want to have to do on their
Yeah,
own.
now we're gonna be trashed. Yeah,
No,
that's
no.
the stereotype. Yeah.
Well, because the truth is the women don't really want that, but their parents want it for them,
Yeah. It can be,
because
yeah, for sure.
they want them to have an easier life than they had. And
Yeah.
they are fear-based in life. And what you're talking about is not being fear-based,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
not being or lack-based, and not being afraid of periodic struggle.
Mm,
And that image that your friend you were talking about, he wanted to maintain that image, but change something.
yeah.
He didn't want to have to.
And to go to that, like that crossroads, because that's the crossroads if you really want to look at it. Do I choose, I would almost say, fear or love, right? Because in my mind, I
That's all
equate
this.
that direction of finding my zone, because there's self-love in that zone. There's
Yeah.
love of the other, there's love of rejection, there's just love. So the fear direction is the one that takes you to basically everything. That it's like, I always look at, you should slow down a little bit, because I'll mentor a lot of people in leadership roles, and there's a quality that's very, very associated with a manager, and
Hmm.
there's a quality very, very associated with a leader. And what'll happen is that when a manager wants to become a leader, they're now struggling, because the same quality that made them really good as a manager is exactly the one that stops them from doing the job well as a leader. And the humor is that the thing we're talking about, is mitigating downside risk. So the manager does a very good job of basically figuring out every way to stop everything from going wrong. That's
Right.
what the manager does.
Don't take risks. Don't grow.
Exactly. And make sure that everybody in your team is happy. So that means you're just trying to accommodate, you're trying to figure it out and trying to manage downside potential risk. Now, the leader's job is totally opposite to that. The leader's job is to create challenges, right, that create that risk. So now you've got these struggle between the two. One's trying to create a vision, which is pushing us through another iteration of what we could become. And this other side is sitting there with this, how do I make sure that we don't screw it up, right? And those two are really diametrically opposed to one another
Right.
in many
Sure.
ways. And
Absolutely.
so when you talk about the mindset, how do you take, and that's my challenge regularly, how do I take a mindset of someone who's always trying to figure out downside risk and then support them to saying, oh, I'm creating a mindset, and you can call this scarcity and abundance. There's a lot of terms used for this, but how do you help them there? And that's something I spend a lot of my time doing in my own work with people and even in myself.
It just occurred to me, people want to go on a safe adventure, which is that's self-contradictory. But
Yeah.
that's
I
how
took one of those. I took a cruise ship for the first time in my life last year or this year, yeah.
yeah.
And I told Ronnie, this is like a safe adventure, and I'm never going to do this again because it just I don't remember a thing. I don't think, did we have an experience? Did I And then we went to South Africa and I walked down the shanty towns and we said, we'll never forget this experience the rest of our lives. It was a
Right.
bit edgy. It was scary. I learned a lot. So yeah, that safe adventure is very different.
Right. And I was gonna equate it to Disneyland and theme parks and things where you feel like you're doing something and, your adrenaline gets going because you're hanging, very safely, but
Yeah.
it appears that you're not. And so that's how the world has mitigated that, is a false experience that appears real, and false
Hmm.
evidence appearing real is fear. So, but they know going in there, I'm not going to get hurt here.
Yeah.
And so at some point in time, like you did it on the first visit, but at some point in time you go, I'm kind of cynical about this. I'm kind of yeah, wow. You know, the only way to have that real experience is to be in a place that you haven't been in before and bring who you are up till now into that and start sorting out those conflicts like you did between the manager and the leader.
Yeah.
You have to look at that and not look at it as confrontational, but look at the tension between the two. Is which of these are we going to say is most important right now?
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I mean, you've caught some of the new book, the Connection Playbook, and I'm doing my best to address that exact point. Is that the energy that I bring into the discussion will often define what happens. So, yeah, I would agree with you completely. Yeah. But
yeah,
my question to you is this is, and this is horrible with me, probably not only with you, but with everyone in my life, is that I'll take one subject and move 100 different directions and then afterwards realize that we were supposed to be talking about this thing called a crossroad. So I would love to make sure that I don't screw up your show by letting my brain take us in 20 different directions.
you can't because that's, Yogi Berra said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. And that's totally unuseful information. And when we talk about a crossroad, we think of, I couldn't continue going this direction or this or that. It's not that way. It's
uh,
like you just talked about. This is the crossroad.
yeah.
It's an infinite number of choices that's been narrowed down to what you're aware of right now. And where it
Yeah.
is that you want to be is you. You want to get to your authentic you. But most folks don't realize that for a long time, if they do ever. My greatest concern with my stepfather, who was very grounded in mitigating risks and making as much money as he could and dying with the number as big as it could be.
Yeah.
And he did that. My concern was that, in the last hour and a half, he's going to go, shit, that was the wrong thing to
Yeah.
do. And,
Which happens. Let's agree that, if people, there's a lot of studies done by people who are nurses and people who are, helping people and supporting them
right.
through their deaths. And then they'll always say, like, the thing that they'll often say on their deathbed is that I wish I wasn't so afraid, or I wish I had done what I really wanted to do in my life. There's a lot of that sort of those statements that occur.
And
Yeah.
I think that's why I created the show. That's my greatest fear, is that I will regret not having reached because of fear. And, I have done a bunch of fun things, really remarkable things, and I've been really, really good at a lot of them, but it's not paid me very much. And so, I just have kind of gone from one thing to another, and I was always able to make rain. Whatever I did, I was bright enough and interested enough and whatnot that I could, start making things work. But, I got to a certain age and that ability stopped. People quit giving me opportunity because I had less hair and what I had was gray. And so
it's funny because when I was doing my editing for the videos of the new book, right, the fact that you even shared that you would be interested in the work itself got me so enthusiastic. And even knowing that you had to upgrade your computer was like, oh my God, then if I can be part of the journey with you to upgrade your computer, like, so in that way, my life had meaning because I could have done the same thing with somebody else. And who knows if they would have done good or bad, who really cares? But the whole point was that whole journey became meaningful to me because I could be with you and part of that journey.
Right.
And I think like by sharing it on the show and then also welcoming it into your life, you'll find that the kind of people you want in your life will begin to meet you.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is that I have started not trying to satisfy all those folks go, you did what? At what age? You moved and started, what? The folks that go, ooh, that's interesting. Those are the ones actually I want to be around. And,
exactly.
and the
you saw how excited, sorry to interrupt you again, but you saw how excited the trip you made when you picked up everything and went across the country. I mean, I was a pig in shit. Like when you did that, I was like, I had so much respect and admiration for you that we even did a show on that topic on my show, A Wonderful Chaos. So that was where you were an inspiration to me because you took a major life change and you said, I'm going to do this. And I believe that anyone that's doing that is an inspiration to me, regardless of how old they are or what phase of their life. That's like, wow, they're doing it.
Right.
And there's such beauty and passion and it isn't easy. And it isn't the road that was, like we said, it was the love of you chose love and not fear. And I believe that, you chose love and not fear to get to the woman that you loved. But I would imagine if I was like to project onto you as, we're friends and I'm taking that liberty, like probably the next stage of love is like, oh, Andy, even if I am old, I am going to make it rain. And I'm going to make it rain because I'm going to lose the story that I can't make it rain because I'm old.
That's it. And story is the whole thing to me. And I've gotten to this age realizing my philosophy about story writing had a big flaw in it. It was very limited. It was trying to get to happily ever after. And like it was a destination. And as I'm going to have a big, long talk with Walt Disney when I get to heaven. I'm going to say, listen, man, you took me down the wrong path for a long damn time. And
exactly.
And Sondheim fixed it for me, kind of, with Into the Woods.
And which one? Into the Woods, yeah.
Ever After is screwed up. Ever After is just
so
a mess.
Screwed up.
Because the expectation was unrealistic.
I know.
And they couldn't enjoy.
I know it. It's so frustrating for me. It's I'm the coach and the mentor that have to get between the two people. So, the Connection Playbook, there's one chapter on assumptions and there's one chapter on expectations.
Right.
And I really kind of had to address those two topics very, very, because, and I even referenced Disney in the book because of what you just said, is that these expectations are pulled into a relationship. They screw up the relationship. They could have been a happily ever after because timelines are brought in, what one does, bringing flowers, bringing chocolate, whatever it is that someone brings in as an expectation is now the liability to a happy relationship, which is
Exactly.
just, yeah.
And your book, and I've gotten familiar with the book because, as you have mentioned, you're doing these video segments that that you're still debating whether they come before or after the person reads the chapter.
Yeah.
But tell me about Chris for just a minute, so I can contextualize this. The fellow who's interviewing you.
Chris is somebody who we had a mutual friend who gave us a blind date, and I just fell in love with Chris. And my life is like I fall in love with people. Chris Akana, and Chris wrote a book called The Alignment Quotient, which is no different than what we're discussing. He could easily be on your show. And basically, he said, when you're not aligned with what your meaning and purpose is, then obviously, you don't live and you don't exhibit the kind of behaviors that you'd like to see in yourself, right?
Right.
And so Chris just one day said, hey, why don't we do some videos together? And I said, well, come to Amsterdam and we'll record 32 videos. And that's how that emerged. And he's a scientist. He's taught at universities, and he does a lot of brain science. So what I like about people in my life is I feel like I don't want to be around people that are like me. I want diversity of thought. So he's the science end of my experience. Like, I don't even like to read. I write books, but I don't really like to read, which is kind of, ironic that would be something that I do. But he reads the books and he'll say, Andy, what you're saying is this scientist did this, and this year, this is the study. And then I'll be like, oh, that makes sense, right? But from a weird way, I've already experienced it in my body. So the science of it is less interesting to me. That some people really dig science, and I think it's great. And
it makes for very, very fruitful discussion, because you find that you've got common ground that you didn't know you had. And that, he says, yeah, well, that's this study, this study, this study. And you're going, I was thinking this and I've learned this and I've learned that. And so, you guys are working on the same thing.
Yeah.
Just approaching it different. You're approaching it from an intuitional kind of experiential authenticity standpoint. And he's doing it more clinically. And, but the book, it comes out in September?
September, yeah.
Connection Playbook.
The Connection Playbook, yeah.
This is, I think, I've talked to my partner about it. I said, I want us to go through this book. We do a devotional every day. And I said, I want us to take these chapters and look at the dynamic between us through that lens. And then and it evolves, each step kind of builds. And as you say, a couple of them have natural tension between them. And I just think it'd be a great tool certainly for awake contemporary mindset folks to be objective about looking at a relationship, and also a good tool for folks who haven't thought about it, who are still stuck in happily ever after, and this life's supposed to be this way.
I've had a lot of people sending it to their partners and saying, because I do have the audio book. Unfortunately, I didn't reach out to you because there's a lesson at the end of each chapter, and I actually didn't really know how it would translate in the audio book, right? You have a book with a lesson at the end, and so what I would do is I'd leave the microphone running and then say, and now I want you to do this. Like, oh, that's terrible. Okay, now, so basically I did the lessons on the fly. Like, I just tried to figure out, how do I transpose this from a written book into an audio book. So it was very
authenticity
funny.
Meets courage.
There were a lot of edits. Sometimes there were these long pauses in the audio stream. Like, okay, I got to concentrate before I do this again. But the reason why I say this is because a lot of people have been sending the book to their partner and saying the book starts with a very strong and simple understanding of how you are in relationship to everyone in your life.
Right.
And the idea, if it's okay, I'll just give it quickly because I think it could also be helpful, is that I love graphs, like the XY axes that allow you to plot yourself and then use that as a mirror to reflect back on yourself. Right. And so the X-axis here was what I would always call trust. To what degree do I trust you?
The horizontal axis is trust. Okay.
The horizontal axis is trust. And when I'm looking at trust, I'm really looking at Like, how much like, if you pick up your phone and look, do I trust that you're not looking at another boyfriend's messages?
Right.
Do I trust that when you go out at night, you're not you're being honest with me with what you're doing?
Right.
Do I trust that you're going to be there for me when I'm in a bad space? So that's trust. And what I've seen is that trust is in any way lower, then obviously the likelihood that that relationship is healthy is going to be lower as well.
Right.
So
So the
then
vertical.
the vertical axis is respect. So respect shows up where someone says something and you're dismissive of it. You're like, oh, that, you don't know, or arguing or thinking you know better. Or if someone even, funnily, respect shows up, as you could probably imagine, with between men and women, when the woman shares a problem and the man, and usually this is the stereotype, but it happens as well, is that the man will try to solve it. Right? The man
Yeah.
immediately solves it. So that shows a lack of respect. Although the person
Yeah.
doesn't see it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Ro calls that parenting. She says, you don't want to be in a parenting relationship with your partner.
Yeah. Or mansplaining. That would be another
Oh,
term.
well,
I
yeah,
think people sometimes.
that's the slap in the face version of it. But yeah.
So I just plot those on those two axes, and I ask people to rate people from 1 to 10, and wherever they show up, there's certain behavior that you can expect in the relationship. And then if that's the behavior, the beauty of it is you already know what the expectation of the problems in the relationship are. So
Yeah.
you could say, oh, wow, if this is where I am on the graph in relationship to that person, this is what I can expect as my relationship. And that's a pretty hard pill to swallow, because you're like, hold on, now I have to accept I'm part of the dynamic that I'm blaming that other person for. Because if I'm not trusting to them, then they're not going to be trusting to me. And that reinforcing negative loop is the consequence.
Well, and a lot of times, what comes up in all of these discussions for me is personal responsibility, and the state of our life being the product of the decisions that we've made, and that we got something out of, so we kept doing it even though we maybe didn't like it.
Yeah.
And many people are not familiar with that notion because they're in a blame the world viewpoint. And the first time they get an idea that, oh, wait a minute, this involves me and my choices, I'm helping fly this plane. I'm part of it. The first time that happens is with one of these exercises you've talked about, where they get a chance to look objectively and not necessarily defensively. It probably brings up the defenses, but that personal responsibility thing is a very big hill to climb. But if you don't climb that hill, there are no other hills worth climbing, in my view.
Yeah, it's I had the first chapter was, of course, beginning with yourself, because if your relationship with yourself is in alignment, then it leads into everything. And I kind of waited till chapter 16 to bring in the personal responsibility component, because it's almost like if you read all this and you find it really interesting, it means nothing unless you have this one component, which means you're not going to walk away from a difficult situation. You're going to embrace that it isn't easy, that you're going to be vulnerable in a time when you don't want to be vulnerable because it's the right thing to do. Yeah.
Right.
And it's interesting. My wife and I I'll often, maybe once every year and a half, year to year and a half, there'll be a moment when I feel really, really saddened by something that's happened in a relationship. And she'll often say something like, you left yourself open to that. You were vulnerable in such a way that person could do that to you. And she'll, in some ways, I can hear subtly judge me and say, like, why would you put yourself in that position? Because she doesn't want to see me feeling bad.
Right.
And then I'm laughing because I'm thinking, well, if I didn't allow myself to be vulnerable and feel that pain, I'd be shutting down all of the real beauty in my life. So I can't afford not to let that pain in, because the consequence I already know is a life of kind of very, very shut down emotions and protection and keeping people at an arm's length. And I'm just not going to live that way anymore.
Yeah.
But it means you'll be hurt sometimes.
I debated. First time I got seriously hurt, I questioned, is it better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all? And you have to get to the place where you just talked about, to realize I'm never going to be alive unless I take that risk. And I'm going to survive it. In fact, the great fear is that I'm going to survive it. If it just killed me, we'd be over with. But
Yeah.
I'm going to have to live with that. That's where the pain kind of comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I see that in myself, the way I experience is that like I spent sort of the first half of my life creating identities for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I was the athlete for some of it. I was the jazz musician for some of it. I was an international traveler for some of that. I was a good businessman.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those identities were very much things that I attached to.
Mm-hmm.
So I really felt like this is who I am. This gives my life meaning. This is my purpose. And then it would evolve over time. And what I've sort of come to, and I was always sensitive to make this about my journey, not anyone else. Everyone gets to like process the world how they process. But what I've seen for myself is that in letting go of everything that I thought I was, I feel more at peace with death. It's to die before you die, and realize there's no death in that sense. And yeah, how I would experience it is like just being at peace with what is, and that doesn't happen when I'm trying to be something that outside of myself. So when I say I help people die, what I'm helping them do is be at peace with the loss of whatever they think they are, so that they can be whatever is present for them in that moment.
Yeah, so it's sort of kind of a Zen kind of a versus a cessation. It's the cessation of attachment versus an actual cessation of being.
Yeah.
In fact, it empowers being.
That's what I've experienced, and and I believe it's so for others as well. Yeah.
Yeah. We need to kind of contain this to what people can absorb.
Exactly. Death, no, too far off the script, Andy. Get back on script.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, what I'm saying is, I got another question, but I think can we do this again down the road a little bit? I want to talk about your notion of purpose, because I think there's a lot of confusion around purpose. Like that's an assignment that I'm supposed to discover and achieve. And it's outside of me, and it's already written in the book of life, and I am either doing that well or not.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it's terrible. I think that's I want to kick that around. So, but that'll be, we'll put that in the future, and we will save that, because I think that's I think that, but the way you and I do things, it's going to branch out and it's going to fill the time. Sum up for me, if you can, and I know that this is, I'm torn to even ask it, but the people that listen to this show, the audience I'm looking for, I don't know who listens to the show, but the people that I wrote it for, or that I created it for, were folks like me. I spent 10 years not being who I was to please other people. Didn't please me, didn't please them very much. And then when I shifted, every obstacle in the world presented itself to me. And I felt like, okay, well, I got to go back on track.
Yeah.
Say something about that for the folks that are at that crossroads, to encourage them to not be afraid of what they find, and the fact that they aren't going to be masters of that immediately, and that's a good thing.
I mean, that goes back to fear or love. We discussed it earlier.
Right.
So in my experience, it's funny. I'm always a bit anxious, because I don't want to suggest anyone do anything, because that's their journey. They get to decide what they do. And I don't even want to judge that a person that's doing a job to support their family, their mortgage, the house, and so on, that is in any way a lesser. And I think that's part of where I see society is not serving us.
That's a struggle I have too with the show.
And I do feel like, and it was interesting, because maybe in that discussion we'll have in the future with meaning and purpose, like we may not we're not going to disagree per se, but we'll have different views on that, I believe, because I also in some ways feel that's another form of religion. That's another belief system that if we buy into the belief system, now we're stuck again with trying to figure out what is my meaning and purpose. And then it's just another pain in the butt.
Right.
So going to your question, which was,
I want to leave people with an idea, I think you kind of just did it, that their journey is their journey. And
their journey is their journey, not to judge it, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also want to speak to the other part, which is when you choose to do anything difficult, it goes back to the John F. Kennedy quote. We choose not to go to the moon because it's easy. We choose because it's hard. And when you decide to do your own moon landing, you're really deciding to sort of feel the struggle and learn through it. So what I learned for myself, and I often will say this to my wife, is I'm really proud of who I am. And it's sort of like, it's not really who I am, it's who I aspire to be.
Yeah.
And if I feel myself doing the things that I'm aspiring to be, I'm proud of it, not because it's easy,
right,
but because it's I've not succumbed to what would be an easier route. And that's how I've kind of navigated that in myself. It isn't easy, but I'm proud that I've chosen this path, because it's exactly because it isn't easy that I'm trying to grow, learn, and understand more than I had if I had stayed in that same job, which, who knows, that wouldn't have even been secure.
Right. When we get to that next talk, I'm also going to kick around the notion of winning, what winning means. Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun. Andy Chaleff, Amsterdam by way of Los Angeles, by way of the world. Thank you for being with me on the CrossRoad Diner.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be with you.
Everybody, be with us on the next time. We're going to continue to explore the journeys that we all take and the okayness of that. Come back if you're stuck at a place where you think it's time for change, and get some ideas from other folks here in the CrossRoad Diner. Come on by and have a bite at the CrossRoad Diner, where everyone is welcome and where your spirit goes when it might be time to change direction.